What happened to Sauron after the destruction of the One Ring? Did he die? Was he just diminished? What's the difference between the two? These are the questions I want to answer in this video about the fall of the Dark Lord, the One Ring he forged, self-incarnation, and what death means when speaking of not only mortal beings, but immortal beings like Sauron. On March 25th in the year 3019 of the Third Age, the One Ring, the greatest of the great rings of power, was unmade in the Cracks of Doom in Mordor, the place the Dark Lord Sauron forged it in the Second Age to govern the other rings, to enhance his power of domination on Earth. Of the Rings of Power and the Third Age telling us that Sauron failed, and he was utterly vanquished and passed away like a shadow of malice, and the towers of Barad-dûr crumbled in ruin, and at the rumour of their fall, many lands trembled. Sauron was utterly vanquished. Gandalf, one of the wise, in council with the captains of the West, before journeying to the Black Gate in a desperate final stand to give the ring-bearer Frodo a chance to destroy the ring, says that if the ring is destroyed, Sauron will fall. His fall will be so low that none can foresee his arising ever again. The best part of the strength that was his in the beginning will be lost to him. All that was made with the power of the ring will crumble. Sauron becomes a spirit of malice that gnaws itself in the shadows, maimed forever, unable to grow or take shape. Thus a great evil of the world will be removed. All this talk of falling, being maimed, unable to grow, but did Sauron die when the ring was unmade? What is death in Tolkien's Legendarium? Often I will read or hear people saying that Sauron can't die, he's a Maya, one of the Ainur. Melkor can't die, he's a Vala, one of the Ainur. They cannot die because they are immortal spirits. What about elves? They are immortal and can die. Ah, but they are of the incarnates, say these people, beings that exist as a union of a Fea, soul or spirit, and a Hroa, body. The Ainur are Ealar, beings that exist naturally as discarnate, being whole without a physical body, existing naturally as spirits. What about men? They, like elves, are incarnates, but their spirit does not return to potentially walk among the living in a physical form again, like we see happen with elves, barring exceptional circumstances. Is all of this needlessly confusing to define what death is in Tolkien's Legendarium? I think so, because what these beings all have in common is that the spirit always endures in some way. If an elf dies, the spirit still exists, and can accept the summons to Mandos to potentially be re-embodied in the future. If it doesn't go to Mandos or does not become re-embodied, it won't just immediately cease to exist, it will endure, without me having to get into a conversation about fading in Middle-earth. And if a man dies, his spirit continues also, but he must go to Mandos, and then set out on a path beyond the knowledge of elves, men, or the Ainur. Death, therefore, is not the destruction of that being's existence, it is the separation of the body and the spirit, meaning, technically, the Ainur can die, and like elves, they would potentially be able to die multiple times, even if you want to put the word die in quotation marks. In the First Age, the elf Glorfindel heroically defended the exiles in the fall of Gondolin following Morgoth's attack on the Hidden City. When ambushed on the narrow pass Cirith Thorannath, Glorfindel battled a Balrog and fell with it, something you can hear all about in my video dedicated to Glorfindel, the hero of the First Age. He passed to Mandos as a spirit, but left the halls swiftly due to his noble spirit and deeds. A re-embodied Glorfindel walked among the living again as an even greater figure, even becoming an emissary of the Valar like the Maiar spirits we know as the Istari. Still, he was incarnate. Could Glorfindel have died following his return? Of course. A sword through the heart would be as fatal to him as it would have been when he first walked in Arda. Death, again, being the separation of a body and spirit, as all spirits endure in some way, even if diminished, at least until the end of Arda for some races. It is then common for people to avoid using terms like dead, death, dying when discussing the Ainur specifically. With death, there is no distinction between the death of one of the incarnates and a being who does not rely on a body naturally, who has self-incarnated. Tolkien speaks of Sauron always being debodied when vanquished, belonging to a race of intelligent beings that were made before the physical world, permitted to assist in the making of it. Those who became involved in the making of it became so engrossed with it that when Eru made it real, they entered into physical existence. they became equivalent to the gods of traditional mythologies, remaining within the physical world until the story was finished. They were thus in the world, but not of a kind whose essential nature is to be physically incarnate. They were self-incarnated, if they wished, but their incarnate forms were more analogous to our clothes than to our bodies, except that they were more than our clothes the expression of their desires, moods, wills, and functions. Despite not relying on these bodies, the Ainur could clothe themselves or become clothed in very real, organic, and destructible forms, for good purposes such as the interaction with the children of Eru as equals, or for ill, such as the desire to lord over incarnates as one of them. The deeds performed while in a physical form, tying that spirit more to it depending on the severity. Procreation, such as we see with Melian, or acts of violence, malice, domination and control as we see with Balrogs, Sauron and Morgoth, meaning the possibility of experiencing real physical death is present, even for these immortal spirits that naturally existed without the need for a physical form. Sauron died, and he died multiple times throughout his time in Middle-earth. I can only assume that most associate death with an afterlife, where a soul or spirit goes, or find it a difficult word to use when it comes to beings we so often call gods. In Tolkien, death is described as the death of the body and not the enduring spirit. After the attack on Mordor and the siege of Barad-dûr in the Second Age, Sauron battled against the High Kings Elendil and Gil-galad, and all three died. His body died and he fled as a spirit into the shadows. Earlier in the Second Age, in the changing of the world and the destruction of Numenor, Sauron fell into the great chasm with the island itself and was killed. He then fled as a spirit to Mordor. In both of these cases, Sauron had the One Ring, an object containing the greatest part of his natural power, his anchor to Middle-earth, and he was able to take physical shape again, even if he didn't hold it, as is the case with his death at the end of the Second Age. But even if the ring had never been made, Sauron would still have died in his self-incarnated form, and his spirit would still endure. He would still have taken a great deal of time to rebuild, as Tolkien says. After the battle with Gil-galad and Elendil, Sauron took a long while to rebuild, longer than he had done after the downfall of Numenor. I suppose because each building up used up some of the inherent energy of the spirit, which might be called the will, or the effective link between the indestructible mind and being and the realization of its imagination. The impossibility of rebuilding after the destruction of the ring is sufficiently clear mythologically in the present book. Sauron poured so much of his own power that was natural to him in the beginning into the One Ring, as it needed a greater potency than the other great rings of power. The destruction of the One Ring led to Sauron's death, as all that was wrought with the ring was unmade, possibly including the form he had willed himself once through his connection to the ring over such a long period of time. And this object that contained the greatest part of him was now gone forever. With that power now removed from him, he no longer had the will within him to take physical shape again. For all intents and purposes, Sauron is dead even if his spirit endures. Tolkien uses the same term to describe Miriel in the halls of Mandos, due to her declaring openly that she did not want to return to the world of the living. She changed her mind later. Enduring in the halls did not stop her from being counted among the dead for this declaration, despite still existing. With Sauron, his spirit has become so weakened by the removal of the greatest part of it, that as Tolkien says, it is maimed. Sauron cannot muster the will to have that effective link between the indestructible mind and the realization of its imagination. He would want to return to that physical form he had come to rely on. Tolkien telling us in his essay, Inquiry into the Communication of Thought, that the use of bodies by these spirits in origin is self-arraying, but approaches the state of incarnation. The longer and the more the same body is used, the greater bond of habit, and the less the desire to leave it. It becomes a customary garb, no longer being an adornment as we might see with the powers of the West in Valinor, but something the spirit relies on. Effectively, Sauron would become reliant on the body he formed for himself due to the deeds he performed while in his physical form, his attempts at gaining lordship over the earth and its inhabitants. Even when losing control of appearing as fair to others, following his fall on Numenor, he had to return to an incarnate form, to once again attempt to be a lord over the earth and the incarnates, perhaps explaining his return in the Third Age to the form he had when he fell at the end of the Second, missing finger and all. if we take Gollum's words about the hand of Sauron literally and not figuratively. After his fall at the end of the Third Age, he had to return to an incarnate form, but couldn't. He would realise that power he poured into the ring was gone. Did Sauron die? Yes, but just as with his previous deaths, he endured, desperate to take shape again, but being unable to. Arguably a punishment greater than a true death of non-existence. An impotent former Dark Lord lingering in the shadows, once a tyrant of 2 ages, now a story that others would tell, and one that would become rumour and then myth, dead to those he wished he could rule. Thank you for watching this video, and I just want to say that this is one video of 2 related to the fall of Sauron. Another will be available to you that answers whether the broken and maimed Sauron could ever return to threaten Middle-earth. I want to let people know that you can support the channel through Patreon or YouTube by viewing the links in the description, and you can read about the perks and benefits of supporting the Red Book. I will end by giving a shout out to my top tier supporters Grant, David, Joel, Aelin, Oliver and Victus. Thank you.